In this video, we're painting easy bronze with contrast paint.
I'm going to take 4 different paints here and make a bronze color with the aid of contrast wildwood. So I'm going to be using these 4 different paints. So we have Scale 75 black metal, thrash metal, heavy metal, and speed metal. So they're all silvers going from darkest to lightest, so we'll get different looks. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to give them a coat of contrast wildwood, and we'll see what kind of different bronze looking effects we get out of it in the end. So I've taken the liberty of already priming up 2 shields to use. These are just off of Custodes. They have lots of detail on them, which will really work well with the contrast paint, because if you've used contrast paints, they like having texture. So I'm just going to coat each shield half and half. Going from darkest to lightest. There's the black metal. Thrash metal. Heavy metal. And speed metal, which is almost like a white, so bright as silver. So you can see the 4 different there. So we're gonna go half and half. Okay, now that the paint is dried on my shields, I'm going to take the contrast wildwood and liberally dose the entire shield in it. The contrast paints are designed to be used in one heavy coat, and then what happens is they sink into the recesses and build your shadows for you. And I don't need to worry about being neat. You can already see though that we're getting a nice kind of bronzy color coming through here. And we're just gonna let those dry. Okay, the contrast wildwood paint now has dried on both of the shields, and you can see that they've dried to different colors. The 2 dark silvers both ended up being a very similar bronze. It's very hard to tell them apart, whereas the 2 bright ones also ended up being very similar bronze to one another. Hard to tell them apart, but the dark ones compared to the silver ones, the bright silver ones is very clear the difference. So you could just leave it like that, especially with the light ones. Those look pretty good as is. They're nice and dark in the recesses for shadows and fairly bright on the higher points to show a little bit of a highlight. The dark ones here, they may be a little bit too dark, so if you want to highlight them, then using a bright or just using a bronze sort of color, I've got decayed metal here, which is a similar color, will help add a little bit more shine to it because they're fairly matte after the wildwood dries. So I'm just going to take a bit of that paint, put it onto a makeup brush. I'm going to just dry brush it, get most of that paint off. And we'll just lightly dry brush it. You can get just those high points. And that really brightens that up if you want to add the highlights, or you can just leave it as is, and you also get a nice bronze. The other option is if you want to age it, then you can use something like the Oxide here by GW. And I find this normally requires a little bit of touching up afterwards. You just go back on it with a similar color to your base color, or a bronze in this case. And we're just going to put this in a few areas just to add a little bit of a weathered look to it. I find it works best to sort of over water this down and let it sort of flow into the recesses, since well, it's basically those are the areas that would oxidize first, typically, because that's kind of where the actual water would flow to. And don't worry if it's a little bit thick, it tends to dry pretty nicely. It's actually kind of similar to a contrast paint in that way. And like I said, you can always go back and touch it up a bit if you need to, just using a coppery color. So there we go. We can just let that dry. And then we end up with a nice oxidized shield. So if we look at them together, there we have our two finished shields. So we have a nice bronzy color, nice and dark metallic. One with some added oxidization and one without, and that one was dry brushed and the bright one was not.